Welcome to Askenzie PR's podcast, where we share pearls of wisdom on PR and cybersecurity.
Hello, I'm Lucy Harvey and welcome to the Askenzie PR podcast. Today we are going to be discussing one of the themes which has been running through this year's European Cyber Awareness Month on how to make your home a safe haven for online safety. And joining us in the studio today we have Hitesh Kargathra, lead security consultant from Falanx Group, and Mike McLauglin, head of Assess, who is also from Falanx Group. Hi Mike, hi Hitesh, and thank you for joining us in the studio today.
No problem at all.
So, with so many internet-enabled devices being brought into the home today, it's no wonder that they've become such a huge target for cyber criminals. So first of all, can you just tell us what are the risks with using internet-enabled devices within the home?
Absolutely. With internet-connected devices, there's always the risk because you are essentially sending data out of your network. It really depends how those devices are configured, and there's lots of things you can do around that, which we'll probably cover later. But the risks are losing that data. So if you have a webcam, for example, that is internet-enabled, maybe watching your children in bed or watching your front door, that you can access remotely, there is always the chance that someone else can access that remotely as well and see the same image.
Yeah, I think Mike touches on an important point there. So there's the security aspect, and there's obviously the privacy aspect, and considering, what information that device is collecting and potentially sending out to, the device manufacturer into the cloud. And I think another area that's quite important that people don't always consider is the kind of availability of the devices. Just last week we saw, I think it was a Yale IoT devices, their alarm systems. Their service went down at the back end and no one's alarms worked on their homes. So that's quite an important thing to consider as well.
Interesting. Okay. And so how do attackers get access to these devices? How do they compromise them? Is it just because they're now internet enabled, they have a kind of way to get in?
Not necessarily, I don't think. Just being internet enabled doesn't necessarily mean that there's any security risk with the device. There are lots of ways to break into these kind of systems. For example, leaning back on the Yale devices, these devices are obviously, a lot of them are fitted to your front door. But a few of them have been found to have problems with the Bluetooth implementations and things like that, so you can actually hack them locally, as well as trying to get access to them remotely as well via the internet. Yeah,
I think there's obviously the attack directly on that device, but also if you attack the service that kind of supports that device itself, you've potentially got access to a number of other people's devices as well. So if you break that back end, there's potentially a lot larger issue there. I think you find a lot of kind of attacks that go on. It's the attackers are going for kind of low-hanging fruit, so they're doing kind of scans of the internet, looking for devices with default passwords and things like that, and kind of hitting those. So if you can do the basics to protect your devices, you start to raise the bar a little bit, and you present yourself as less of a target.
Absolutely. I think, was it last year, there was a batch of children's toys, dolls and things like that were internet enabled, that the back end systems were compromised, and basically the toys had recorded children's voices and names, and all that data was sent to the back end, which the consumer themselves can't really control. They've obviously bought the device, they're putting the trust in the manufacturer that where the data is going, it's secured. And that company had a breach. So there's two players in the game, really, isn't there? There's the consumer themselves and also the manufacturers of the products.
Yeah.
So manufacturers, the consumers should kind of follow good password hygiene and things like this, but the manufacturers should also be playing their part to make sure that when they're putting these devices out on the market, they are completely safe. Was that the case, that they should? What else can the manufacturers be doing to ensure they're secure before they are put on the market?
Without sounding cynical, I think it all comes down to money, doesn't it?
It does.
That's the thing.
Last week, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sports, they put out a code of practice for consumer IoT security, which kind of presents a number of requirements that they expect kind of manufacturers and service providers of IoT devices to comply with. It's not law; it's purely guidelines. So it's a fairly soft approach at the moment, but it does kind of touch on some of the basics, like ensuring that devices are not shipped with default passwords, that software's regularly updated. So I mean, I've got IoT devices at home which can be updated, but just never have been because the manufacturer just hasn't bothered. So it's a bit of a wild west at the moment with IoT devices. I think you need to do a bit of research before you purchase them to understand if you're because you're not just purchasing the product, you're purchasing that service. So if that manufacturer is just selling you a cheap product, but then is not willing to invest in ongoing service, then you've got a bit of a challenge there.
Absolutely. My personal opinion is manufacturers could be doing a lot more. But again, as it comes down to money, if you're buying an internet-connected toothbrush or something like that for £25, then there isn't a lot of wiggle room to get security into that device. I'm not sure what attackers would do with your toothbrushing information, but maybe there is something.
So it was recently announced that California is introducing new legislation in 2020, which says that IoT devices won't be able to be marketed or sold with default passwords or easy-to-guess passwords. Do you think that similar laws should be introduced to the UK and to other countries? Do you think that would be a good step?
I actually think the intention of these guidelines is kind of the first step along the way. I think they want to introduce guidelines first, and then they'll probably will start to look at legislation, I think, later on down the road.
Yeah, I think anything that can force manufacturers away from static default passwords or easily guessed passwords can only be a good thing.
And what can consumers do? So obviously the manufacturers have got they've got quite a way to go. But what can consumers do in the meantime to make sure that the devices that they are using are secure? What's the kind of basics that they can follow?
So I think, to be honest, in many respects, it's in the manufacturer's court in terms of providing a facility to the consumers. But there's, you've got to look at the device itself and actually securing that with things like a strong password, things like that, and also looking at your actual environment at home as well, and seeing what kind of security you have around that, as within your home. So making sure you've set up your security appropriately. Do your research on the products that you're buying to make sure you're actually getting a good quality product. If you go for the really cheap IoT devices, as I said, you might be in a position where you get a nice functioning product, but it never gets updated. So when there is a vulnerability, it's never actually fixed. And one of the most basic things is, kind of turn it off if you're not using it. You're not going to attack it if it's turned off. So, there's the basic things as well.
And what about the default passwords? Do they just update them as soon as possible?
Definitely, yeah. Just, out of the box, the guidance is obviously talking about not having a default password at all, which means that when it's shipped, a lot of routers come that way now. You'd have almost like a unique password for every device. But with a lot of IoT devices, the default password is the same across every device you buy off the shelf. So I think they're trying to change that. And yeah, it's definitely good practice as soon as you get a new device to actually, enforce it, put a good password on that. And also to avoid reusing that password anywhere else as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Changing your default passwords on any device should be the first step before even using the service or whatever the device is meant to be doing, check the instruction manual and make sure you change your default passwords.
Yeah, okay. I'll probably add that you need to consider what devices you're actually buying, because I mean, in the case of the Yale alarm system, obviously that was to some people an essential service, and when it went down, there was no recourse for them. So buying things like you're putting your heating systems on with smart thermostats or door locks, you've got to consider that if that goes down, what's your option? So are you happy to put those on? I mean, if your lights don't turn on, then it's not always the worst thing. Or if someone else comes and attacks you and is turning your lights off, it's it's not the worst thing. But if someone can open your front door or disable your alarm, that's a more significant issue.
Okay, that's been very interesting. And finally, just for our listeners, I wonder if you could both provide one golden piece of cybersecurity advice for consumers to use their internet-enabled devices safely in the home. So Hitesh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice is really to do your research on what you're buying, and make sure you're going with a product which is going to get that level of support going forward. You may pay a little bit more for it, but you're paying not just for the product, but for that ongoing service.
Okay, fantastic. And Mike, what would your golden piece of advice be?
It's kind of protecting your own network. So as we mentioned before, changing your default passwords, making sure you've got a firewall on your home network, and again, to reiterate what Hitesh said, understanding what the product is and what you are buying.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I found that very interesting and very helpful, and I'm sure our listeners will too. So thank you both very much for joining us today. And yes, we'll be back again with another podcast to coincide with European Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Okay, thank you.